5 a.m. in New York City, 10 a.m. in London. Good morning, I'm Bonnie Quinn with your Bloomberg brief. Let's get you set up for the day. The US and Iran agree to halt attacks after days of escalation. Talks in Doha set for this week. South Korea prepares for massive AI investments led by Samsung and SK Hynix, planning to spend $880 billion. And US stocks looking to bounce following investors' rotation out of chip makers. Jobs report on deck later this week. Let's get a check on markets around the world now. We'll begin with Winnie Su in Hong Kong for the latest from Asia. Winnie.
Good morning, Bonnie. As you just mentioned, the big news today in Asia is that massive investment pledge by Samsung and SK Hynix to build chip-making facilities and also to invest further in data centers. Now, that has also come with the support from policymakers, and hence, in fact, we saw Kospi, although closed down in the red, actually rebounded from a sharp decline of 3.4% earlier today. And the gains are specifically seen in sectors like power and also solar that are related to the AI infrastructure. And that's why we are seeing that the Kosdaq is up about 8%. Now, Samsung and SK Hynix still down a bit amid that broader rotation away from tech that has done well. However, you flip the board and take a look at the broader Asia market, supported by that the sentiment from the South Korea's overall investment in AI. That's why we are seeing MSCI Asia here up about 0.2%. Also seeing tech continue to lag, but the outlier here is HS Tech, seeing a bit of a dip buying after the week, after having its worst week since October. Back to you, Bonnie.
Winnie, thank you so much. Winnie Su there in Asia. Now to London for a look at Europe. Here's Justina Lee.
Good morning, Bonnie. Now, it's a less sanguine picture here in Europe, with the Stoxx Europe 600 reversing those gains we saw earlier this morning, and it's now down. Now, the tech shares are still leading those gains, but of course, tech shares are a smaller part of the European market. Now, when it comes to fixed income, we're seeing a slight gain in the German two-year bond yield after Spanish inflation stayed stubbornly at 3.6% in June. And I think that might also be feeding into some of the strength we're seeing today in the euro-dollar cross rate, because traders are kind of pricing in the chance of an ECB rate hike for the rest of the year a little bit more today. But if you kind of flip the board here and we look at the longer-term trend in the euro, we've actually seen quite a bit of depreciation to the extent where the euro is actually at a one-year low versus the dollar. JP Morgan and Morgan Stanley coming out to say that they even see that cross rate getting to 110 kind of over the next year because of a hawkish Fed. And of course, the next data point we're looking at in terms of that is kind of the euro area CPI coming out later this week, and kind of that will have an effect on kind of where this currency evolves. Money.
All right, Justina, thank you so much. Justina Lee there in London. Here in the US, we are looking to bounce as we head into a holiday-shortened trading week. Last 2 days trading not just in June or the quarter, but the half. We are halfway through the year at this point. Obviously, there's been some repositioning of portfolios. There may continue to be for the next 2 days. Last week, for example, tech and telecoms had their second worst week of the year, and we ended Friday down 1% on the Nasdaq 100, but it looks like we might be bouncing by that much again today. S&P futures also higher, and Russell 2000 futures higher. The Russell 2000 has been outperforming the other benchmarks. Also, the equal weight S&P 500 hit a record as well on Friday. Let's take a look at the bond universe, because, of course, Kevin Warsh will be speaking at Sintra this week, and we'll be looking for anything out of the jobs report that might give us any kind of a hint as to how FOMC thinking will be evolving. The 10-year yield staying at 434.84, no change there, no change at the back end. We are up just a basis points, creeping back ever so slowly higher. And then oil, right? We put on just a few cents after we saw some escalation over the weekend that seemed to damp down a little bit as Iran and the US decided they're going to continue talking in Doha this week. And that's your picture for this Monday morning. Let's get some individual movers now. Here's Chloe Melly.
Good morning, Bonnie. As we have been talking about, SK Hynix and Samsung are set to invest $880 billion to fuel this AI boom in South Korea. And we're seeing actually this read across in US stocks who happen to be suppliers to SK Hynix and Samsung. So the likes of Lam Research, Applied Materials, Qualcomm, and a few other companies that we could not fit here on the board are in the green this morning on the back of this investment pledge from South Korea. Moving on to BioLife Solutions, a medical supplies manufacturer manufacturer that is also up this morning after being set to attract takeover interest from a range of parties, including Repligen. And so we are seeing this sector more generally have a lot of consolidation, and BioLife Solutions might be really the next name then. We're up about 4.6%. And finally, Bridgepoint in London is up after buying Kane Anderson Real Estate for $1.4 billion. This is the first push for that UK company into the US property market, and we are seeing investors react very positively to that. We're up more than 10% in London this morning.
All right, a nice move there. Chloe, thank you so much. Chloe Melly will be back later in the hour. Also coming up in this hour, ECB President Lagarde set to speak later today. Fed Chair Warsh also at Sintra this week. We'll discuss more with Gude of BNY Investments Newton. But first, oil giving back some of its gains. This after the US and Iran have paused fighting before peace talks resume this week over the Strait of Hormuz and, of course, other issues. Joining us now from Dubai is Dana Crate. Dana, great to chat with you. Obviously, we saw the escalation over the weekend. Several weekends in a row, we've seen that now, but peace talks do seem to be resuming. What will be heaviest on the agenda? What are the most difficult and thorny issues that need to get sorted out?
Yes, good morning. Indeed, the U.S. and Iran will continue these technical talks this week. And as we saw from a report earlier, that it will be held in a few days. There are other reports saying it could be in Doha, Qatar, so here in the region. After this escalation that we saw over the weekend, where I think that both sides just want to assert their positions and assert their power over Hormuz. Hormuz still is, of course, at the heart of what we saw this past weekend, and it will be at the heart of these discussions. Although Iran, I think, wants to focus on the unfrozen assets, wants those transfers of assets that are held in Qatar. We saw the Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian saying earlier today that they agreed that $6 billion out of the $12 billion held in Qatar will be released to them. Didn't specify when, although I think we should wait for the American side and the Qataris to confirm whether this will be released. I think in these technical talks, of course, sanctions waivers, of course, the frozen assets, Iran definitely wants to pump some money into the economy to revive it a little bit after the war with the U.S. and Israel. And of course, again and again, it will be Hormuz. Hormuz is definitely the thorniest issue, would be on the agenda. And Iran and Oman today held a meeting, part of this joint committee, to see how they want to administer the Strait. Still, these negotiations are ongoing between the two.
These weekend flare-ups, Dana, do we expect to see them continue? I mean, Hormuz traffic drops off every time this happens, of course, because vessels could be easily attacked, right? And then come Sunday evening, everyone says they're going to talk again and these flare-ups stop. But is it a permanent stoppage now or no?
I think we will see more of these skirmishes, right? But the ceasefire is still holding. I mean, the U.S. wants Iran to understand that they don't have a free hand over Hormuz or the region, that they can strike a container ship whenever they want to. We saw that the container ship was struck by Iran on Thursday, and then another one 2 days later, and the U.S. responded in both terms. I think what would be worrying is what the U.S. president said on Saturday after retaliating against Iran. And he was saying, you know, there might come a time where we cannot be reasonable anymore, and I have to finish the job militarily, or I have to militarily completely finish that job. So this is the worrying sign, although I think both sides want to hold on to this ceasefire. One, I don't think the U.S. would want to reimpose the blockade, or Iran wants that. The free flow of vessels into Hormuz has definitely, dropped down the price of oil, which is important for the U.S. president. And of course, it's important for Iran that it allows for its own oil to flow back again and sell them, especially now after the sanctions waiver. So I think we might still see these skirmishes, just because, you know, Iran and the U.S. want to reassert themselves in this war, which is frozen now, and of course in the Strait of Hormuz, but that the ceasefire so far has held.
All right, Dana, thank you so much. That is Bloomberg's Dana Crate in Dubai. In Asia, South Korea announcing investments of $880 billion from companies including Samsung and SK Hynix into chips and data centers. Joining us now is Tom McKenzie, host of Bloomberg Tech Europe. Samsung and SK Hynix taking the lead here. Tom, what exactly are they planning to build and in what time frame?
They are taking the lead. They're taking the biggest chunk of that $880 billion investment, the two companies, between them planning to build 2 fabs or production facilities for chips, of course, each. So 4 in total over a 10-year period. The South Korean government also promising that they'll make sure that there's the land, the water, the energy to fund and support those facilities. So those on the fab side, on the production side, but they're also getting data centers, plans for those to be built, and robotics facilities, all of these within the context of a South Korea that is very much looking over its shoulder at the competition. Of course, both SK Hynix and Samsung lead when it comes to the market share they have in high bandwidth memory, but they also do NAND and DRAM memory chips as well. And we know that China has its own 5-year plan, close to $300 billion. That is part of the Chinese calculation. So very much framed in terms of the competitive challenge that South Korea faces itself in. And of course, in this environment where there is just massive demand, particularly for memory, but also for NAND and DRAM, particularly for high bandwidth memory, but also other parts of the memory space. And that is expected to continue in the years ahead. So it's trying to address that need whilst also making sure that South Korea itself remains at the front edge when it comes to this AI competition.
All right, Bloomberg's Tom McKenzie, co-host of Bloomberg Tech Europe. Thank you so much. Now to other top stories trending on the terminal this morning. British American Tobacco is cutting 9,000 jobs to reduce costs. That's about 1/5 of its global workforce. The maker of Dunhill and Lucky Strike has been struggling with falling demand for traditional cigarettes. Verizon and British Telecom BT Group are creating a joint venture for their international businesses. They will have a combined yearly revenue of around $4 billion. Verizon will pay BT an equalization payment of $625 million. If the deal is approved, both companies will have equal voting rights. China is expanding export curbs on Japan, adding 20 more organizations to its control list and another 20 to a monitor list. The move deepens tensions with Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi's government. The restrictions are an expansion of curbs introduced in February, this time targeting defense research groups and affiliates of Mitsubishi. Coming up, we'll drumbeat to Andy Burnham's speech scheduled for later today in his bid to become the UK's next Prime Minister. This is Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Brief. I'm Vonnie Quinn in New York. Andy Burnham is expected to give his first major speech today since confirming his plan to succeed Keir Starmer as UK Prime Minister. Excerpts released from the speech show Burnham pledging the biggest devolution of power in British history. He'll be giving local authorities more decision-making powers. Bloomberg's Lizzie Burden joins us now from London. How will this devolution work, Lizzie, and does he need permission to do this?
Well, good morning, Vonnie. And the speech expected to come from Manchester, just underscoring how important devolution is for Andy Burnham. Of course, he used to be the mayor of Greater Manchester. And you might ask, is he going to be so keen on devolution if you have other parties taking over, for example, that Greater Manchester morality that he has just left? In terms of how it's going to work, he wants re-industrialisation outside of London. That's the push he's going for. So Whitehall departments are going to be expected to gauge which areas under their remit can be transferred to regional governments. It's going to be a massive push that would hand capital budgets to the mayoralities. But yes, this question continues. Is he going to feel as passionately about devolution when he's in the centre of government?
Absolutely, and if he'll be voted in based on that kind of a platform, maybe that'll be a popular platform. Who are we looking to see make a return? Any characters of old, Lizzie?
Well, look, this speech today is a massive moment for Andy Burnham, setting out his economic policy. Really, the market tuned into this. And because so far we've only heard snippets of what it might be from his time in Manchester and from people who we know to be advising him on economic policy, the likes of Andy Haldane, the former Bank of England chief economist, Jim O'Neill, former Goldman Sachs economist. But when it comes to who the Chancellor will be, we just don't know. And it's not even likely, according to sources, that it's even going to be announced in this speech. But names swirling around include Ed Miliband, the Energy Secretary. He has done a lot of work to help Burnham into this position. We know that he was putting pressure on Keir Starmer to set out a timetable to resign. But he's something of a scary figure to the markets, you might say, coming from that wing of the party. Other names floating around include Shabana Mahmood, the Home Secretary. She's
thought to want to stay in her position. But a dark horse candidate could be Pat McFadden at Work and Pensions. He might be seen as more of a facilitator to Burnham's strategy, though nonetheless very competent when it comes to Whitehall, a Labour veteran in the party.
All right, Lizzie, we'll wait for the details after that speech. That is Bloomberg's Lizzie Burden. Thank you. Staying in Europe, central bank leaders gathering in Sintra, Portugal for the ECB's annual symposium. ECB President Christine Lagarde expecting to deliver opening remarks at 3 p.m. Eastern. Bloomberg economics editor Zoe Schneeweiss joins us now. Zoe, what will be the main message out of this particular Sintra?
We're expecting Lagarde to be very clear about the ECB's worry about uncertainty. So we know the ECB became the first G7 central bank to hike. They did that just this month. Now, the uncertainty message she wants to push is that they might hike again, but they currently are a little bit in the holding pattern. After that peace deal that we had, the ECB has said that there is no forceful reason. Lagarde has said there's no forceful reason to push on. The other thing that will be exciting is that this week, Kevin Warsh will be in Sintra. So this will be the Fed chief's first international appearance in front of an audience. This weekend already he was in Basel, but that was behind closed doors. So it'll be really interesting to see how Lagarde interacts with him. But tonight it'll be very much about where's the euro area at, where's inflation at, what's next for rates.
Exactly, and whether anyone in power thinks that a mistake was made potentially in ECB monetary policy decision-making recently. As for Warsh, as you say, it's really only his second time in public speaking, so there'll be a lot of eyes on him. Will he talk about price stability in the United States, or will he focus more on AI and productivity? As we know, many central bankers recently have been talking about overinvestment and the risks that that might bring, and have mentioned the US, have called out the US specifically.
Yes, that'll be an interesting situation. That'll be on Wednesday. He's doing a joint panel with Lagarde herself and with the central bank chiefs of Canada and of the BOE. Now, the ECB and the Canadian central bank just have recently called out those worries about AI. It's a 1-hour panel. I'm sure interest rates will be front and center, but AI can't be ignored right now, so we are anticipating there'll be questions and there'll be comments on that, on what AI means and also what AI means for financial stability.
Exactly. Zoe, thank you so much. That is Bloomberg economics editor Zoe Schneeweiss. The European Union's Trade Commissioner and China's Commerce Minister slated to meet in Brussels this week, where the EU hopes to address a widening trade imbalance that reached about $410 billion last year. Let's get more with Bloomberg's Suzanne Lynch in Brussels. Suzanne, there's been an imbalance for a long, long time. What is empowering Brussels, or maybe forcing Brussels, to try to address it head on now?
I think there's a growing realisation that the European Union is facing a China problem when it comes to this ballooning trade deficit, and in particular how it's impacting some of those core industries in European manufacturing. Top of the list is the car industry. I mean, in the last few days, we've seen more headlines with big cuts coming from Volkswagen in particular. And the European car makers have been losing ground to China. And indeed, the other side of things is that dampening consumer demand in China has also hit the profitability of companies like BMW, for example. So what we've seen over the last few weeks, about 2 weeks ago here in Brussels, there was a meeting of EU leaders and there was a substantive discussion about China. And really our sourcing, our reporting is telling us that there is a hardening of stance towards China. There is a realisation that the EU needs to be tougher. Now, within that, there are divisions. You've got some countries like Spain, for example, who are welcoming Chinese investment, and then others who want to be more tough. So whether the EU will be able to speak with one voice remains to be seen.
Absolutely. Suzanne, thank you so much. Bloomberg's Brussels Bureau Chief, Suzanne Lynch. Coming up, we're going to take a look at your front page news. This is Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Brief. I'm Bonnie Quinn in New York. Time now for your front page news. First up, the New York Times with the latest on the aftermath of the Venezuela earthquakes, as volunteers use drills, hammers, anything they can find to look for more survivors. The U.S. is preparing to deploy more than 250 personnel, including urban search and rescue teams, and is mobilizing $150 million in humanitarian assistance. The death toll now approaching 1,500. Next up, the Financial Times is reporting the AI boom is fueling a record surge in deal-making in the U.S. power and utility industry. Companies are competing for capital to build energy infrastructure for data centers. According to Deloitte, M&A transactions in the sector are already more than 40% higher this year than in all of last year. And finally, the Wall Street Journal on the trillion-dollar borrowing binge, pushing the stock market to risky levels. According to FINRA, U.S. margin debt rose 54% to a record $1 trillion in May from a year ago. Meanwhile, high-risk leveraged ETFs are growing rapidly, as is trading in options tied to them. The Wall Street Journal points out the risks surfaced in South Korea last week. All right, let's take a look at your markets. As we head into the Monday session, it is, of course, a holiday-shortened week. We have futures pointed higher. Nothing much happening with the dollar index, and just a little bit being added on to oil. Those escalating tensions, though, are abating. Coming up, Richmond Fed President Tom Barkin warning on inflation. We'll discuss with Ella Gude. It's 5:30 a.m. in New York City, 10:30 a.m. in London. Good morning, I'm Bonnie Quinn with your Bloomberg Brief. Let's get you set up for the day. The US and Iran agreeing to halt attacks after days of escalation. Talks in Doha set for this week. South Korea prepares for massive AI investments led by Samsung and SK Hynix, planning to spend $880 billion. And US stocks looking to bounce following investors' rotation out of chip makers. The jobs report on deck later this week. So let's take a look at those futures then. In the green this Monday, a holiday shortened week. Don't forget, just 4 days, and 2 of those days are in June in the first half. The other 2 are in the second half. So we already are getting into the second half of the year. We obviously saw some rotation, repositioning last week, and looks like maybe investors have done enough of that, or perhaps other areas are rallying. Mind you, the Russell 2000 didn't fare as badly in the run-up to today. It's still in the green, but perhaps not as much as the other indices. The Nasdaq was down 1%, don't forget, on Friday. We also have some concern over tech and communications. They had their second worst week last week, so we'll see if they bounce back. But breadth continuing to improve and volume also continuing to balloon. Let's take a look at yields. We're seeing flat curves still. The back end, absolutely no movement. We're at 486.70. Front end, we're up just about a basis point and a half, about 410.86. The next catalyst for any movement there will be Kevin Warsh at Sintra. The following catalyst will be Thursday's jobs report. Oil as well did put on a few cents, even though we're still at much lower levels than we were all through the war. We're at 72 apiece when it comes to Brent and also WTI, different contracts trading there on the prompt month. Let's get to some individual movers now. For that, we'll go to Chloe Melly. Chloe.
Good morning, Bonnie. So SK Hynix and Samsung have pledged to spend $880 billion to fuel this AI boom, this AI rush in South Korea. And that will be really beneficial for some of those US companies that are suppliers to those 2 South Korean firms. And so we are seeing Lam Research, Applied Materials in particular, and Qualcomm up in the green this morning on the back of that pledged investment. Moving on to Viridian, and the biotech company is also rallying this morning about 14% after saying it has secured FDA approval for its thyroid eye disease drug, which is a very rare and debilitating autoimmune condition. And so we're seeing that really drive the stock this morning. And finally, Bridgepoint here in London is also up, really rallying as well, up about 10%, 11% now, after buying the real estate arm of the investment firm Kane Anderson in a deal worth $1.4 billion. And this is the company's first push into the US property market, and we are seeing investors react to that very positively this morning for Bridgepoint.
Right. Chloe Melly, thank you so much. That is Chloe Melly there in London. Bond managers piling into the belly of the Treasury curve. PIMCO, Natixis, Capital Group, all looking at the 5-year area as the sweet spot to ride out the early days of the Warsh era at the Fed. Joining us now is Ella Gude, head of fixed income and co-head of real returns at BNY Investments Newton. Ella, what is your take on where investors should be waiting out the beginning of the Warsh era, given that we're not fully sure yet exactly how he's going to tackle price stability.
Good morning. Yes, indeed. I mean, it does feel like a new era, but all else equal, from our perspective, we have been running quite a significant underweight in terms of duration, most of that coming out of the US. And actually, as you rightly point out, most of that has been at the belly of the curve, so 5 to 10 year, in fact. But at this juncture, we have closed those underweight. So we have also been participating on the buying side in the 5-year part of the curve. But we would just be a bit cautious here in terms of turning overly optimistic yet. We would say actually the jury is still out. You know, the first step in terms of the first Warsh meeting that we got was substantially well received by markets, we would say. But going forward, all we've done with the Fed from our stance is we've met where the pricing in the markets has been. So we can elaborate further in terms of how expectations are on the inflation side and growth side. And I think that's what's going to matter really for the belly of the curve.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to read to you something that the Richmond Fed President Tom Barkin has been saying in the last couple of days, in fact, at the Aspen Ideas Festival on Sunday afternoon, talking about inflation. It's hard to have confidence that you're headed back to 2% without any more influence from the Fed funds rate or the labour market or some other feature that creates disinflation the other way. Now, you say macro is benign at the moment, Ella, but if it is, wouldn't we be seeing inflation coming a little bit back towards 2%?
Well, we have been, I mean, we would say there's been an underperformance on the inflation target from the Fed for the last 5 years. I think Warsh, in fact, alluded to that in his meeting. So it's very difficult actually to get inflation back to that, you know, once you get to that 3%, to get it substantially to the lower side. So I completely agree with the comments you highlighted here, that you do need this other dynamics to play out. And look, we believe that ultimately we're in a structurally higher inflation environment and potentially higher rates environment. And so I think this is exactly why we say the jury is still out in terms of whether we're going to get the type of tightening policy that will get inflation significantly lower from here. So we're a little bit more on the cynical front, we would say.
Ella, many investors have come on and said they like Europe right now, and you also like Europe. And I'm curious as to why. First of all, we have a big cohort of investors that feel like maybe the ECB has made a mistake with monetary policy. We also have a lot of economies in Europe really suffering. I mean, just look at Germany trying to push back on China's influence on the car market, right? Cutting 100,000 jobs at Volkswagen and essentially just rearranging an entire industry.
Yes, I mean, look, I think the consensus is quite bearish Europe this year. And we would argue, actually, if you look at the outperformance of Europe relative to the US since last year. So we actually believe that's going to continue, and it's more structural in nature. The fiscal component, but also the capex and buildup needs to come for Europe too. So we think that's underpriced, relatively speaking. That's certainly on the equity space. And secondly, we have a relative pessimistic view on that side of the world. And the additional, if you like, euro for the last 15 years has been going to US markets. So any sort of reversal of that capital flow, let's say over the next 5 years, we believe would probably favor more domestic markets. And I would probably extend that argument to the UK as well. So net on the margin, particularly when you take cue of the AI trade, which is obviously quite extended now. So any sort of repricing of that particular sector, we believe on a relative basis would favor Europe over the next couple of years.
Fascinating. You also talk about the theme of nationalist investing. You say it's a structural theme. What is nationalist investing?
Well, look, I mean, we are in an exciting time in the sense that, lots of capex demand, whether it's to build energy security, to build infrastructure, to build defense, you have to build AI. So we have demand on capital across the world, and supply of capital is the same as it's always been, right? So in that sense, that demand for capital means that the policy will tend to favor some of that domestication of that capital. I mean, for example, we've heard some of that here in the UK. There's more noise out of Europe. There's certainly more noise out of the US. So we are structurally speaking and strategically speaking in that type of environment. So you will get more domestication, I believe, at least in terms of capital flows to help build up this massive need for capex. And so I think we should see more of that going forward.
Ella, you say, looking for real return. Where do you find that in the bond market outside of, sovereign debt, let's say? Are there areas of corporate credit that look attractive to you in terms of what they might offer real yield-wise?
Yes, I mean, we have favored energy for a good part of the last 12 to 16 months, we would say, and it's been a similar theme in equity markets as well. I mean, regardless of the Middle East conflict, that was our stance previous to that. So those areas remain well protected. In this environment where we believe curves will stay steep, and still policy rates will be conducive to the cycle, we think banks are favored as well. So we have, earned more in that side. And then on the equity space, so maybe not in credit so much, but healthcare and industrials remain supported. Industrials in credit space remain supported as well. So those are areas where we have been leaning more. And of course, on the core bond side, inflation protection still is relatively well priced, we would argue. So these have been areas of interest from a capital allocation point of view.
Okay, Ella Gude, thank you so much for joining us today. Ella Gude of BNY Investments Newton. Now to other top stories trending on the terminal this morning. Verizon and British telecom company BT Group are creating a joint venture for their international businesses. They will have a combined yearly revenue of around $4 billion. Verizon will pay BT an equalization payment of $625 million. If the deal is approved, both companies will have equal voting rights. Bloomberg sources say Williams is in advanced talks to buy rival natural gas pipeline operator Momentum Midstream for about $5.5 billion. The deal will be one of the largest ever. President Vladimir Putin says Russia continues to face a fuel supply squeeze as the Kremlin weighs measures to stabilize the domestic market following refinery outages. Putin confirmed that a full ban on diesel exports is among measures under discussion. Coming up, Washington and Tehran set to resume truce talks this week. More on that. This is Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Brief. I'm Bonnie Quinn in New York. War escalating and then fading, at least for now. The US and Iran have halted their attacks on each other ahead of talks in Doha this week. A US official telling Bloomberg both sides will stand down and vessels can move freely through waterways. Bloomberg's Kasia Klimashinska joins us from Washington. Kasia, yes, they potentially can, but if you were a ship owner, you might be a little hesitant, and we're seeing that in the numbers, right? The numbers have gone down slightly.
Yes, but at least the U.S. equity futures are taking it as good news. I see they are up a little bit this morning, and indeed overnight, Sunday for Monday, we didn't at least see any new military activity, and the two sides remained relatively quiet, with President Trump not really posting anything on Truth Social. So last we have is this report that both sides will stand down on a further military action, trying to respect the ceasefire and hoping that the talks that are scheduled for this week in capital of Qatar, that those talks will bring some progress. We know that the two sides will discuss the Strait of Hormuz, as Iran wants to keep control of this key waterway and perhaps charge tolls on or get payments from the passing ships in some way, whereas the U.S. wants this international waterway to just remain open. On the other hand, we did see some flows both ways, especially along the route designated by the U.S. and its allies. The talks this week are also supposed to focus on Iran's nuclear program, and I think that's where things can get very tricky. We know that the two sides don't agree on much in here. Luckily, there's the 60-day clock. We are less than 2 weeks into it, so there is still plenty of time remaining.
Yes, it's going to be a long process. Now, domestically, we also have some Supreme Court decisions, and there aren't too many days left, and there are some big ones that President Trump will be watching out for. Give us the rundown, Kasia.
a big week here in Washington, D.C. for the Supreme Court and for Trump. The justices will rule on two key issues for the White House and also for the markets. One of them will be about the Federal Reserve and whether Trump can fire one of the governors, Lisa Cook, over alleged mortgage fraud that she is denying. And so she is asking the court to let her stay on the job while she is defending herself. And if the justices take Trump's side, that really puts the independence of this key economic institution in question. We'll see whether then Trump takes further steps to perhaps fire some other members of the board who are not voting as he would like. And we know that he wants the central bank to lower interest rates. The other decision that the justices will have to make will be regarding the birthright citizenship. So Trump issued an order saying that not everyone who is born in the U.S. automatically becomes a citizen. That is only for those children who have at least one parent who is a citizen or has a green card. So we'll see how justices rule on this one. There is some track record here where the Supreme Court, which has a conservative majority, has been backing some of Trump's proposals that seek to limit immigration. So the first decisions can come as early as 10 a.m. here in Washington today.
All right, we'll be keeping an eye out. Kasia, thank you so much. Kasia Klimashinska in Washington. For more on the latest out of Hormuz, let's bring in Bloomberg's Alaric Nightingale. So, Alaric, what is the situation? Are ships continuing to go through Hormuz, or do flare-ups like what happened at the weekend just stop everything in its tracks?
I think it's a bit of both. What we saw at the weekend has certainly not helped owners to feel more confident about going through, but within the ceasefire, there's now this kind of extra ceasefire that maybe will give some of them comfort. The owners that I've spoken to would say that they're at least as cautious as they were, if not more so. But it's a huge pool of ship ownership, and people have very different attitudes to risk. So it is always tricky to be very declarative about how much the shipping industry is kind of changing its attitudes. I mean, you have to also keep in mind that there's just this constant change of, little details of things happening, a couple of attacks in the last week, ceasefire, it goes on and on and on. So owners are just kind of, I think they've got their policies. Individual events obviously don't help necessarily, but I think that they've really just got their set policies, and it takes a big deal for them to really sort of like change what those policies are. And
of course, they're talking to each other on a daily basis and talking to authorities in all sorts of countries, I'm sure, as well. Alaric, Iran says it held the first joint committee meeting, this Iran-Oman-Hormuz joint committee that's been set up. What are they going to decide, and will it be recognised?
That's a fantastic question. I mean, the big question is tolls. Will the shipping industry be charged to go through the Strait of Hormuz in a mandatory way, or in a way that is ultimately mandatory? We've seen some talk that Oman might lean that way, but that's a very, very difficult and pressured thing for them to do. But equally, if they don't impose tolls, then everybody would go via the Omani route. There are basically two corridors now, one that goes by Iran, one that goes by Oman. So if everybody just started to go through the Oman route because it was free, it would massively undermine Iran's efforts to charge tolls. So that's going to be an important kind of question for everybody. And it's really the key sticking point as to, what happens next in the Strait of Hormuz.
Alaric Nightingale, thank you so much. Turning to tech, South Korea amassing $880 billion in investments into chips and data centres, with Samsung and SK Hynix leading the effort. Joining us now is Bloomberg's Neil Campling. Neil, is this a repeat of the US playbook, and how will it play out?
Morning, Bonnie. In part, it's a repeat of the US playbook in terms of building out in the AI infrastructure side of things. But it's different also in that much of the investment is going to be on really supplying those memory chips and the AI chips, which actually will really benefit the US because of those supplies that have been restricted so far just because of so much demand. It might actually help pricing for the big US tech companies that have been struggling to secure supply at decent prices. So it should benefit in one sense for the US tech supply chain, I think, over the course of years. But it takes a long time to build out these manufacturing plants. Let's not forget that.
Sure, absolutely. The other story that caught my eye today, and I guess we should be expecting it, right? The Wall Street Journal reporting that China has now actually matched Anthropic when it comes to cybersecurity. How has China done that without access to NVIDIA chips? And should we expect this in other areas of AI now?
Yeah, it's in some respects it's quite alarming that given they haven't got the access to the leading edge chips, that China can apparently catch up so quickly on some of these cybersecurity side of things, which Anthropic managed to find flaws in coding that's taken researchers decades to find. And now China are claiming to have caught up in areas of this technology. So it's something that we're going to need to keep an eye on, because there are certainly questions around where China's AI is relative to the US. And while it's probably quite important that actually we've heard at the weekend that the US have agreed to allow Anthropic's Mythos to allow companies again to use the toolset.
Yeah, exactly. Possibly after they learned of that development. Now, the Financial Times is also reporting that Google is capping Meta's use of Gemini AI. What's going on there, Neil?
So it appears again that there's just not enough compute power to allow Meta the access tools that they require. So this leads to that first question we're talking about with South Korea committing more. Then it's just yet more signs across the globe that we're just struggling to find enough compute power to power all of these AI models that really need to go ahead with these AI developments. So it's another interesting take. And the other side part of that, of course, is that better use of tokens, given the rising token costs this year. So more developments to watch out for, as the hyperscalers are also committing to huge amounts of AI capex spend, which is clearly needed for these compute power needs.
The story just keeps on developing. Neil, thank you so much. Bloomberg's Neil Campling there. Coming up, we're going to get you set up for your trading week. This is Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Brief. I'm Bonnie Quinn in New York. Now a look at what's ahead this week. The Sintra Forum kicks off in Portugal. President Christine Lagarde of the ECB scheduled to speak at 1:30 Eastern today. Then we get US manufacturing PMIs and ADP employment data on Wednesday, and it's all leading up to the critical jobs report Thursday this week, because of course Friday we're off. Let's take a look at your macro environment now as we head into the Monday session. Just 2 days left in not just the month, but also the quarter and the half, in fact. But traders will be happy to see that we're bouncing back today after the S&P 500 basically ended Friday unchanged. The Nasdaq, though, was down 1%, and there was so much volatility in Korea last week, and it appeared to be beginning to bleed over into the United States. Now, for what it's worth, we had Korea rallying massively once again yesterday, although I think we may have decoupled a little bit from that story, back to old times, as it were. Bloomberg Dollar Index pretty much unchanged, and we do have a little bit of heat here in oil, not just New York crude, but also Brent crude putting on about 1%, 2%. But we're still at relatively low levels, just above $70 on WTI. This, of course, after we had a little bit of an escalation over the weekend, or more than a little bit of an escalation over the weekend between the US and Iran. And then we had the US saying that it had agreed to stop all hostilities and that peace talks would resume this week. Some headlines just coming out now of Tasnim saying that the venue for the talks with the US has not been confirmed. It was moved from Switzerland to Doha. That has not been confirmed, according to Tasnim. And also Iran saying no technical talks with the US are planned for this week. So the mystery continues.